Disconnect the battery. On the negative terminal, use a 10mm socket. Loosen up the terminal and just slide that to the side. Make sure the engine is cold and take the coolant cap off. You can do this slowly just in case there is any pressure in there, and there's none. Set that aside. You can either extract the coolant out of the reservoir with some type of fluid extraction pump, or you can drain the coolant like we're going to show you right now. Take these bolts out, use a 7mm socket, and over here take these bolts out. There's a couple missing here. You can just move this panel out of the way. The drain for the radiator is located right here. I'm just going to take a piece of hose. You can use a piece of rubber hose and just put it on the end just so that the coolant doesn't go all over the frame, and then I can drain it right into a bucket. Then just open this up and let it drain. Take this cover off, take the oil cap off, and slide the cover up. Disconnect this connector right here. It's for the mass airflow sensor. Just push down on the button and slide it out. And same with this one. Just disconnect this. There should be a button here. There might be a lock on it you have to pull out. This vehicle doesn't have that. Just slide it off and out of the way. Loosen these screws up. Use a T25. And there's one over here as well. There's a clip right here. Just slide that clip off, just like that. Now loosen up these worm clamps on the snorkel. Use a 7mm socket or a straight blade screwdriver. Now slide this off. Slide the airbox up and out, and take the snorkel, slide this out, and if you can disconnect the hose right here, you could do that, or come all the way over here and just pop it off there. Now just grab the airbox and just pull up right here, there's a little rubber grommet, and then slide it out and pull this cover just out a little bit. There you go. Underneath the oil pan near the front of the engine, or at least the passenger side of the engine, we're going to take a block of wood and a floor jack. It's right there. Somewhere near the corner is the stronger part of the oil pan. So you don't want to put too much pressure on it, just support the engine. Now we're going to take these 3 bolts out, use a 15mm socket. Now we have to take these bolts out. For this one, we can use the same 15mm socket, but the one in the middle, we're gonna have to use a wrench unless you wanted to take this pipe off, but I'd rather not disturb that pipe. So we'll use a wrench for that one. Use a 15mm wrench. Once it's loose, you might be able to do it by hand or just use a ratchet wrench. There you go, take that bolt out. Now these other 2, you can just use a socket. Push the hose out of the way a little bit. And when the engine starts tipping, just raise up the engine a little bit. That's good. Now grab the mount and carefully slide it out of the way. Now we need to take this bracket out. Use an 18mm socket. Loosen up these bolts. One there, there's one right here, and there's also one right here. All right, take all those bolts out. And slide the bracket out. Before we take the belt off, you can actually take a 10mm socket and just crack these bolts free. The belt being on there is just going to prevent the pulley from spinning, so don't take those bolts out completely, just crack them free. Use a 10mm socket. When taking off the serpentine belt, you're going to need a serpentine belt tool or equivalent and use the correct adapter and slide it in right here. Loosen up the tension and slide the belt off the idler right here. And you can take the tool away. Now take the belt off the water pump pulley, off the alternator, off the AC compressor, and off the power steering pulley. And then you can slide it past the tensioner. You have to fold it to the side and take it out. Now loosen these bolts up. You can do this by hand if you loosened these up earlier while the belt was still on. You want to take this pulley off and grab the pulley and slide it out. Now take these bolts out around the perimeter of the water pump. Use a 10mm socket. Now with all the bolts out, you should be able to grab the water pump, slide it out. If it doesn't come out too easily, just grab a pry bar. Just try to pry it out a little bit. You might lose some coolant. And just slide it out. Now grab the gasket and just make sure you take this off the block, the engine block. Take a razor blade or a scraper and just scrape along the gasket area. Just make sure it's nice and clean. Take a rag and some brake parts cleaner and just clean that surface area. Make sure it's real cleaned up good. Cleaned up real good. Take the new water pump and the gasket. Make sure it lines up. And you can try to line this up down here. Grab one of the bolts and just get it started. Making sure you don't fold over the gasket or anything. Gasket looks good. Now we can torque these bolts to 7 foot-pounds. Now we can put the pulley on, just line it up. There is some alignment pins that are going to line up with those holes. And put the bolts in. Get those started. There's a special tool you can use to hold this pulley from spinning or do the best you can. You can use your 10mm socket and snug these bolts up. Or when you put the belt back on, it'll hold it a little better, and then you could snug them up as well. Those are good. Take the belt, and the same way it came off with the rib side up, we're going to go underneath the belt tensioner. And this part's going to go over the power steering pump. And you could always draw a picture before you take it off if the vehicle doesn't have a picture or a key. And then this is going to go over the water pump here. And then on the other side of the tensioner, it's going to go around the crank pulley. And then around the AC compressor in the front. Then this will go around the alternator on top. just have the rest of the belt to go over the idler pulley, but we got to take the tension off the tensioner and slide the tool back in position. And as you take the tension off the belt, slide it over the idler pulley. Then double check your other pulleys, make sure they're all lined up. Now take this bracket and line it up. Get the bolts back in position. You can torque these 3 bolts to 74 foot-pounds. Now install this mount. Just slide it in position. And get the bolts started. And you can also get these bolts started as well. You might have to use a pry bar and just pry the engine over a little bit just so that this mount lines up with the bolts so that it seems a little bit center. And snug these bolts down first. And then tighten this one down. Now torque these bolts to 46 foot-pounds. Do the best you can with that middle one. Be careful at this point, you're going to want to lower the floor jack so that the engine just settles. Tighten this bolt to 46 foot-pounds. And these 2 lower bolts to 73 foot-pounds. Now slide the air box back in position. And line this grommet up. Push it down. That's good. Put the snorkel on. Don't tighten that down yet. Put this hose on. Now take the top of the airbox, line the hinge up, and slide this down. Slide the snorkel on, and make sure all the bolts look like they're lined up right. That's good. And tighten the bolts down, or the screws down. And tighten down the worm clamp. Not too tight. Connect the electrical connector. Lock it in place. And same with the mass airflow sensor. Lock it down. Put this cover on. Just line the grommets up. Put the oil filler cap back on. Now you can close this valve. Close the drain, just snug, not too tight, and take this hose off. Put this shield back in position. And put the screws back in. And snug them up. And even if you have screws over here, put those in, and over here. After you're done, you can use a funnel like this and add the appropriate type of coolant. You can check your owner's manual and make sure it's the correct mixture, 50-50. And you want to top the coolant off to the fill point. Once it's full, you want to run the engine for about 10 minutes, constantly monitoring the full level and adjust accordingly. Have the cap on after you shut the vehicle off, and then once the vehicle cools down, adjust again. While the vehicle's running, you also wanted to monitor the coolant temperature and make sure the vehicle doesn't overheat. After you add the coolant, you can put the cap back on and lock it down. Should be good to go. Connect the battery and snug it down. Just make sure it's nice and tight.